Tyler Whitaker froze mid-step, his breath catching in his throat as he stared at the bloody mess of fur trapped between metal jaws. What he had thought were fallen leaves rustling turned out to be the desperate scratching of a dying animal. The raccoon's eyes locked with his, intelligent, pleading, somehow human in their desperation. Its tiny paw stretched toward him, trembling. Mrs. Peterson, his science teacher, had always warned them about wild animals carrying rabies, about never approaching injured wildlife. Yet something in those eyes broke through every warning, every fear. Blood matted the raccoon's silver-gray fur, staining the forest floor beneath it. Only yesterday, Tyler had walked this same path without a care in the world. "I'll help you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I promise." What Tyler didn't know was that freeing this raccoon would not only change his life forever, but save it in ways he could never imagine. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. The Whitakers hadn't always been at war with themselves. Before Michael lost his job at the lumber mill 18 months ago, they had been a typical American family in Pine Creek, Georgia. Their white clapboard house at the edge of Willow Forest had echoed with laughter rather than arguments, and 10-year-old Tyler's sensitive nature had been something to nurture rather than worry over. Now the house sagged with the weight of unpaid bills and unspoken resentments. Sarah Whitaker's hospital scrubs often hung untouched for days as she worked double shifts to keep the family afloat. Michael, once proud and purposeful as the family's provider, now haunted the house like a ghost, his military posture giving way to slumped shoulders. The foreclosure notice that had arrived yesterday was tucked away in Michael's sock drawer, another secret in a house already bursting with them. Tyler, small for his age with thoughtful hazel eyes, had become expert at making himself invisible when the shouting started. He'd retreat to his room with its faded dinosaur wallpaper from happier times, stroking the empty dog bed that had belonged to Cooper, his golden retriever who'd died 3 years ago. Tyler still blamed himself for not noticing Cooper's illness sooner. "You're too sensitive for your own good," his father had told him once, not unkindly, when Tyler had cried over a wounded bird they couldn't save. But lately, Michael's observations came with an edge of disappointment that cut deeper than any playground taunt. The only true ally Tyler had was his grandmother. Margaret Wheeler had moved in with them after her Alzheimer's diagnosis last year. Though her mind wandered increasingly through misty corridors of the past, she had moments of startling clarity, especially when it came to wildlife. Before her illness, she had been a respected wildlife rehabilitator with hands that seemed to speak a language animals understood. "Animals remember kindness longer than humans remember cruelty," she often told Tyler, her blue eyes briefly sharp with the wisdom of her 80 years before clouding over again. "That's why they're better than us." On Tyler's bedside table sat 3 orange prescription bottles. Medication for the heart murmur discovered after Cooper died, when Tyler's grief had manifested as chest pains and shortness of breath. The medication was expensive, another weight on his parents' shoulders that Tyler felt with every pill he swallowed. Just beyond their property line, Willow Forest stretched for miles, ancient and seemingly eternal, yet even this was under threat. Rumors circulated about Evergreen Development Corporation buying up land for a new luxury housing community. Frank Peterson, Michael's childhood friend and the father of Tyler's chief tormentor at school, had been hired as the local consultant. He'd been dropping by more frequently, speaking in hushed tones with Michael about opportunities that made Sarah's expression tighten with disapproval. In this fractured landscape of adult worries and childhood fears, Tyler had found refuge in the forest paths where he could pretend everything was still whole. Until today, when the sound of an animal's suffering brought his own world's brokenness into sharp, unavoidable focus, The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of oak and pine as Tyler crouched beside the trapped raccoon, his backpack abandoned a few feet away. The metal jaws of the trap had clamped around the animal's right front paw, and dried blood crusted around the wound. It wasn't the kind of humane trap that simply contained an animal. This was designed to maim, to prevent escape at any cost. "It's okay," Tyler whispered, though his heart pounded so hard he worried it might trigger his condition. "I won't hurt you." The raccoon's chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. Its eyes, rimmed with the distinctive black mask, fixed on Tyler with an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. Despite its obvious pain, it didn't growl or bare its teeth, almost as if it understood Tyler wasn't a threat. Tyler slowly unzipped his jacket, remembering what his grandmother had taught him about approaching injured animals. No sudden movements, calm voice, telegraph your intentions. "I'm going to try to open this trap. It might hurt more for a second, but then you'll be free." His mind raced through everything he knew about raccoons. They could carry rabies, they were nocturnal. They were clever enough to open complicated latches. This one was clearly in shock, which might explain its unusual calm. The trap itself was rusty and cruel-looking, with manufacturer markings that had long since worn away. Tyler studied the mechanism, trying to understand how to release it without causing more pain. He'd need leverage, something to pry apart the jaws while keeping his fingers safe. A twig snapped nearby and Tyler's head jerked up. Was someone coming? If it was a hunter checking traps, or worse, Frank Peterson, who boasted about pest control. Nothing moved between the trees. Turning back to the raccoon, Tyler noticed something he'd missed in his initial shock. The animal's underside showed signs of nursing. This wasn't just any raccoon, it was a mother with babies somewhere depending on her. "You have a family," Tyler whispered, new determination flooding through him. "Don't worry, I won't let them down." From his backpack, Tyler retrieved his water bottle and carefully poured some into his cupped hand, offering it to the raccoon. After a hesitant moment, the animal lapped weakly at the water. The trap's mechanism became clearer upon closer inspection. There was a spring-loaded release that needed to be depressed while simultaneously pulling the jaws apart. Tyler found a sturdy stick nearby and wedged it into position. "This is going to hurt, but just for a second," he warned, though he knew the raccoon couldn't understand his words. Yet somehow, those intelligent eyes seemed to convey comprehension. Taking a deep breath, Tyler pressed down on the release with the stick while using both hands to pull the trap's jaws apart. The rusted metal resisted, and for a terrifying moment he thought he wasn't strong enough. Then suddenly, with a harsh metallic scrape, the trap released. The raccoon let out a high-pitched cry that sent birds scattering from nearby branches. It pulled its injured paw free and immediately tried to stand, only to collapse back to the ground. The paw was mangled, bone visible through torn flesh. "You can't walk," Tyler said, tears welling in his eyes. The animal would never survive with such an injury. Predators would find it, or infection would set in. It would never make it back to its babies. Without fully thinking through the consequences, Tyler stripped off his outer shirt, leaving only his t-shirt against the autumn chill. He approached the raccoon again, this time with the shirt stretched between his hands. "I'm going to pick you up, okay?" "I'll get you help." The raccoon watched him, whiskers twitching, but made no attempt to flee or fight as Tyler gently wrapped the shirt around its trembling body. It weighed less than he expected, a sign of either natural slenderness or concerning malnutrition. As Tyler cradled the injured animal, his mind raced ahead to the problems this rescue would create. His father would be furious. His mother would worry about diseases. The medication Tyler needed to prevent heart complications cost more than his parents could easily afford. How could he ask them to pay for veterinary care for a wild raccoon? But then the raccoon's paw reached up and pressed against Tyler's chest, right over his heart, and all doubts vanished. In that moment, a connection formed that transcended logic. This wasn't just any raccoon. This was a soul that had sought him out, had trusted him despite every reason not to. "I'll call you Scout," Tyler decided, the name coming to him suddenly. "Because you found me when I was lost." The walk home seemed longer with his precious cargo. Each step required care to avoid jostling Scout's injuries. By the time the Whitaker house came into view, the afternoon was fading toward evening, and Tyler's arms ached from the careful carrying. He paused at the edge of their property, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was doing. His father's truck wasn't in the driveway. Small mercy. His mother would be at the hospital until late. That left only Grandma Margaret, whose reaction was impossible to predict given her condition. Taking a deep breath, Tyler approached the back door, shifting Scout carefully to free one hand for the doorknob. The raccoon had remained remarkably calm throughout the journey, occasionally making soft, chittering sounds, but otherwise seeming to understand the need for quiet. The kitchen was empty when Tyler entered, the house quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the television from the living room. Grandma Margaret would be watching her afternoon shows, lost in stories that sometimes seemed more real to her than present day. Tyler headed for the basement stairs. The old laundry room would make a temporary shelter, warm, quiet, and separate from the main house. He'd gathered supplies along the way, some fallen pine needles and leaves for bedding, blackberries from a bush near the path for food. "We'll get you fixed up," Tyler promised as he carefully set Scout down on an old towel spread across a storage bin. "Just stay quiet, okay?" Scout looked up at him, those intelligent eyes somehow conveying understanding. For a moment, Tyler felt as if he were falling into those eyes, connecting with something ancient and wise that transcended the barriers between species. The sound of the basement door opening shattered the moment. "Tyler? Is that you down there?" Grandma Margaret's voice drifted down the stairs, stronger and clearer than it had been in weeks. "Yes, Grandma," Tyler called back, heart pounding. "I'm just organizing some stuff." But Margaret Wheeler was already descending the stairs with surprising steadiness, her silver hair caught in its usual loose bun, her faded floral house dress hanging loosely on her thinning frame. "You never organize stuff," she said with a hint of her old humor. "What are you really—" She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Scout, her pale blue eyes widening. Tyler tensed, ready for shock or fear or anger. Instead, Margaret's face transformed with wonder. "Those eyes," she whispered, approaching slowly. "I know those eyes." Tyler blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" Margaret knelt beside the makeshift nest, arthritis forgotten in her excitement. 20 years ago, I rehabilitated a raccoon family. The mother had been shot, but the babies survived. I raised them, then released them right here in these woods." Her gnarled finger gently touched the space between Scout's eyes. "This one has the same eyes, same spirit." Tyler had never seen his grandmother so present, so connected to the moment. "Her paw is really hurt, Grandma. Can you help her?" Margaret examined the injury with practiced hands that seemed to remember what her mind sometimes forgot. "This is a cruel trap, not meant for humane capture, meant to kill." Her voice hardened. "Who would put such a thing in our woods?" "I don't know," Tyler admitted. "But she's a mother, Grandma. She has babies somewhere." Margaret nodded, her movements becoming purposeful. "Fetch my old kit from the storage closet, the green box with the white cross, and bring clean towels and warm water." For the next hour, Tyler assisted as his grandmother cleaned Scout's wound with a gentleness and skill that belied her age and condition. She hummed softly as she worked, an old folk song about forests and freedom that Tyler had heard in fragments during her clearer moments. "Will she lose the paw?" Tyler asked, voice small with worry. Margaret's hands never paused in their careful cleaning. The bone is crushed here and here. Even if it heals, she'll never use it properly again. But raccoons are adaptable. They can manage with 3 limbs if needed. The sound of a vehicle in the driveway made them both freeze. "Your father," Margaret said, suddenly looking her age again, uncertainty clouding her eyes. Tyler's stomach knotted with dread. "He'll make me get rid of her." Margaret straightened her shoulders. "Not if I have anything to say about it. This is no ordinary raccoon, Tyler. When you've worked with animals as long as I have, you learn to recognize old souls when you meet them." The sound of the front door opening, then Michael Whitaker's heavy footsteps crossing to the kitchen, sent Tyler's heart racing dangerously. Scout sensed his distress pressing closer against his side. "Remember," Margaret whispered as footsteps approached the basement door, "animals remember kindness longer than humans remember cruelty. Stand your ground, Tyler. Some things are worth fighting for." Michael Whitaker's shadow fell across the basement floor before he fully appeared at the bottom of the stairs. His tall frame seemed even more imposing from Tyler's position kneeling beside Scout. The day's stubble darkened his jaw, and the circles under his eyes spoke of another fruitless job search. "What's going on down here?" Michael's voice held the forced evenness that Tyler had learned meant trouble brewing. Then his gaze fell on Scout, and his expression hardened into something Tyler barely recognized. "What the hell is that?" "It's a raccoon, Michael," Margaret answered before Tyler could speak, her voice steadier than it had been in months. "The boy found it caught in a trap." Michael's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. The bloodied towels, his son's missing shirt, the injured animal looking remarkably calm despite the human tension filling the room. "A wild raccoon in my house." Each word fell like a stone. "Have you both lost your minds?" "Those things carry diseases. Rabies, for God's sake." Tyler found his voice, small though it was. "She's hurt really bad, Dad. Someone put a trap in our woods." "Not our woods," Michael corrected sharply. "Technically, the Henderson property starts 50 yards past our property line, and they have every right to trap pests on their land." Margaret rose to her feet with surprising dignity. "That wasn't a humane trap, Michael. That was a killing trap, illegal in this county for the past 15 years, as you well know." Something flickered across Michael's face. Recognition, then discomfort. Tyler wondered briefly if his father knew more about the trap than he was letting on. "Doesn't matter. It's still a wild animal, and it's not staying in this house." Michael stepped forward. "I'll take it to the woods and put it out of its misery." "No!" Tyler cried, throwing himself protectively in front of Scout. The sudden movement made his chest tighten, a warning sign he'd been taught to recognize. He forced himself to take slow, deep breaths. "She's a mother. She has babies waiting for her." "All the more reason to end this now," Michael said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Those babies won't survive without her, and she won't survive with that injury. It's kinder this way." "Since when did you start confusing cruelty with kindness?" Margaret's words cut through the tension. Her eyes held a clarity that momentarily silenced Michael. "I taught you better than that, didn't I, when you were a boy?" Tyler looked between them in confusion. Margaret wasn't Michael's mother. She was his mother-in-law. What was she talking about? Michael's face had gone very still. "That was a long time ago. Not so long that you should have forgotten." Margaret stepped closer to her son-in-law. "You were about Tyler's age when you brought me that raccoon kit with the broken leg. Begged me to save it, and I cried when your father found out and told you to drown it." Tyler stared at his father in disbelief. Michael Whitaker had rescued a raccoon, the same man who complained about tree huggers and rolled his eyes at animal rescue commercials. Michael's jaw worked silently for a moment. That was different. "How so?" Margaret challenged. "Because I wasn't responsible for feeding a family then." Michael's voice rose suddenly. "I wasn't watching my house slip into foreclosure while my wife works herself to death. I didn't have a son with a heart condition and medication costs that—" He stopped abruptly, glancing at Tyler with regret. The basement fell silent, except for Scout's labored breathing. Tyler felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. Foreclosure. They were losing their house. The sound of the front door opening broke the tense silence. "Hello?" Sarah Whitaker's voice called. "Anyone home?" "My shift ended early." Michael closed his eyes briefly. "Perfect timing," he muttered, then raised his voice. "We're in the basement, Sarah. You'd better come down here." Footsteps approached, and Sarah appeared on the stairs, still in her hospital scrubs. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and fatigue lined her face. She took in the scene with a medical professional's assessing gaze. "What's happening?" she asked, then spotted Scout. Her eyes widened. "Is that a raccoon?" "Tyler brought home an injured raccoon," Michael said flatly. "I was just explaining why it can't stay." Sarah approached cautiously, her medical training evident in the way she observed the animal's condition without touching. "That's a serious injury. The paw is likely beyond saving." "She needs help, Mom," Tyler pleaded. "She has babies somewhere." Something in Sarah's expression softened. She looked at her son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in weeks. "You wrapped it in your shirt?" Tyler nodded. "And it hasn't tried to bite or scratch you?" "No, she's different. She understands." Sarah exchanged a glance with Michael, who shook his head slightly. "Tyler," she began gently, "wild animals don't—" "Don't tell him what wild animals do or don't understand," Margaret interrupted. "You of all people should know better, Sarah." Sarah straightened, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You weren't always set on becoming a doctor," Margaret said, her voice gentler now. "Remember that summer you worked at the wildlife sanctuary? You had such a way with the injured birds." Sarah's expression changed, something like wistfulness crossing her features. "That was before. Before practical considerations. Before reality." "Before me, you mean?" Michael said quietly. The unspoken tensions of their marriage suddenly filled the small basement. Tyler looked between his parents, feeling the familiar helplessness that came with witnessing their unraveling relationship. Scout made a soft, chattering sound, drawing everyone's attention back to her. She was looking directly at Sarah, those intelligent eyes somehow conveying a silent plea. Sarah sighed and knelt to examine the raccoon more closely. "The wound needs proper cleaning and antibiotics. Even then, recovery isn't guaranteed." "So we take her to a vet?" Tyler asked, hope rising. "With what money, Tyler?" Michael's voice was strained. "The foreclosure notice came yesterday. We're behind on your medication payments. The power company left a final notice. Where exactly do you think we'll find money for veterinary care for a wild raccoon?" Sarah's head snapped up. "Foreclosure notice? You told me we had 3 more months." "I was trying to handle it," Michael said defensively. "Frank's offered me that job with his hunting guide service. It would keep us afloat." "Working for Evergreen Development? The same people trying to tear down half the forest for that ridiculous luxury community?" Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. "You know how I feel about that, Michael." "How you feel doesn't pay the bills, Sarah. None of your feelings have kept this family from falling apart." As their voices escalated, Tyler felt the familiar tightness in his chest intensifying. He fumbled in his pocket for his emergency medication, but in his distress, the small pill slipped from his fingers and rolled under the old washing machine. Scout suddenly moved, despite her injury. She stretched her uninjured paw toward Tyler's chest, touching exactly where his heart fluttered erratically. The gesture was so deliberate, so human-like, that everyone fell silent. "Did you see that?" Margaret whispered. "She knows." Tyler's breathing eased slightly under Scout's touch. The raccoon's eyes held his, steady and reassuring. "I don't care what it costs," Tyler said with sudden determination. "I'll give up my allowance. I'll sell my bike. I'll do anything. But Scout needs help, and I'm not abandoning her." The basement fell silent again. Michael looked at his son, really looked at him, and something in his expression shifted. "Scout?" he asked finally. "That's what I named her," Tyler said, "because she found me when I was lost." Michael ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 42 years. "When I was your age," he said slowly, "I found a baby raccoon near our chicken coop. Its mother had been shot by a neighbor. I hid it in my treehouse for 3 days, feeding it with an eyedropper. When my father found out—" He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "He said caring about wild things was a weakness, that I needed to toughen up." "What happened to the raccoon?" Tyler asked quietly. Michael glanced at Margaret. "Your grandmother saved it. Told my father she'd take care of it. I visited it every day at her wildlife station until it was released." "I remember," Margaret said softly. "You named it Bandit." Sarah looked between her husband and her mother, seeing something healing that had long been broken. She sighed deeply. "There's a wildlife veterinarian in Cedar Grove, Dr. Jessica Collins. I treated her father last year. Maybe she'd be willing to work something out." Hope bloomed on Tyler's face. "Really?" "No promises," Sarah cautioned, "and we'll need to talk about protocols for handling wild animals. Proper gloves, disinfection procedures." "So she can stay until we get her to the vet?" Tyler asked, hardly daring to believe the tide had turned. Michael and Sarah exchanged a long look, years of unspoken communication passing between them. "Until tomorrow," Michael finally conceded. "First thing in the morning, we'll take her to Dr. Collins." Tyler's smile was brighter than anything his parents had seen in months. Even Scout seemed to relax, settling more comfortably against Tyler's side. Margaret nodded in satisfaction. "You'll see," she said cryptically. "This raccoon will change everything." None of them realized just how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how the simple act of saving one injured animal would set in motion events that would transform not just the Whitaker family, but their entire community. That night, after Scout had been settled in a makeshift nest in the laundry room with water, soft food, and clean bandages, courtesy of Sarah's medical supplies, Tyler lay in bed, listening to his parents' hushed voices from the kitchen below. "We can't afford this, Sarah," Michael was saying, his voice strained but no longer angry. "I know," Sarah replied softly. "But I also know what it's like to give up something you love because it seems impractical." "I don't want that for Tyler." "When did we become these people?" Michael asked after a pause. "When did we stop being the ones who cared about more than just surviving?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Somewhere between medical school loans and layoffs and mortgages?" Their voices faded as they moved deeper into the house, but Tyler had heard enough. For the first time in months, his parents were talking instead of shouting. Something had shifted, a small crack in the wall of tension that had divided their family. Tyler drifted toward sleep with his hand pressed against his chest, remembering the gentle touch of Scout's paw over his heart. Dawn broke over Pine Creek with a gentle persistence that belied the tensions of the previous night. Tyler had barely slept, checking on Scout every few hours despite his parents' insistence that the raccoon would be fine until morning. He found her awake each time, those intelligent eyes watching him with what seemed like gratitude. By 6:30, the entire Whitaker family was awake and moving with unusual purpose. Michael called Dr. Collins' wildlife clinic and left a message explaining their situation. Sarah prepared a carrier from an old cat crate they'd kept in the attic, lining it with soft towels. Even Grandma Margaret seemed sharper than usual, moving around the kitchen with a clarity that had become increasingly rare. "She likes blackberries," Tyler reported after his latest check on Scout, "and she drank some of the water." "That's a good sign," Sarah said, her doctor's instincts engaged despite her specialty being human rather than animal medicine. "It means she's not in complete shock." Michael paced near the window, occasionally glancing at his phone. Dr. Collins called back. "She can see us at 9. She says to keep the raccoon calm and avoid unnecessary handling." "Did she say anything about—" Sarah hesitated, glancing at Tyler. "About costs?" Michael's jaw tightened. "She said we'd discuss options when we get there." The unspoken financial worry hung in the air, but no one was willing to dampen Tyler's cautious optimism. For the first time in months, he seemed like himself again, the thoughtful, compassionate boy who'd existed before family tensions and health concerns had dimmed his spirit. At 8:30, they carefully transferred Scout to the carrier. The raccoon remained surprisingly cooperative, though she chittered nervously when the door closed, her injured paw held protectively against her chest. "It's okay," Tyler soothed, pressing his fingers gently through the carrier grate. "We're getting you help." They piled into Sarah's practical sedan rather than Michael's truck, which needed gas they couldn't afford to buy. The wildlife clinic was nearly 30 minutes away, situated at the edge of Cedar Grove, where the town gave way to protected woodland. As they drove, Tyler noticed his father's attention drawn repeatedly to the roadside. "What are you looking for, Dad?" Michael's expression was tight. "More traps. If someone set one, there might be others." Sarah glanced at her husband. "You think it was Frank's crew?" "Who else would be trapping out there? The land's been marked for development for months. Standard procedure is to clear wildlife before they bring in the machines." "But those killing traps are illegal," Sarah protested. "Illegal doesn't mean it doesn't happen," Michael replied grimly, "especially when there's money involved." Tyler listened to this exchange with growing dismay. "Are they killing all the animals in our woods?" Margaret, who had insisted on accompanying them despite her fragile health, reached across to pat Tyler's knee. "Not if we have anything to say about it, child." Cedar Grove Wildlife Rehabilitation Center turned out to be a modest single-story building with a large fenced area behind it. Several outdoor enclosures housed recovering animals. Tyler spotted a red-tailed hawk in one and what looked like a young deer in another. Dr. Jessica Collins met them at the entrance, a tall woman in her mid-30s with short-cropped dark hair and keen eyes that assessed Scout immediately through the carrier walls. "Bring her in. Let's have a look." The examination room was clean and efficient, with none of the antiseptic smell Tyler associated with human hospitals. Dr. Collins moved with confident precision as she gently removed Scout from the carrier and began her examination. "Female, approximately 3 years old. Lactating. She definitely has kits somewhere." Dr. Collins carefully inspected the damaged paw. "This is from a conibear trap. They're only legal here for water sets targeting specific species, and certainly not on dry land. Someone was breaking several laws setting this." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "How bad is the injury?" Dr. Collins' expression was professionally neutral, but her words were direct. "The paw is crushed beyond repair. The humane option would be amputation." Tyler's breath caught. "You want to cut off her paw?" "It's either that or euthanasia," Dr. Collins said gently. "The damage is too severe for the paw to heal properly, and it would become a source of chronic pain and infection." But she could survive with 3 legs? Sarah asked, her medical knowledge helping her process the information clinically. Raccoons are highly adaptable. She could lead a relatively normal life, especially if released in an area with easy food access. Doctor. Collins stroked Scout's head with surprising tenderness. The more pressing concern is her kits. If they're young enough to be nursing, they won't survive much longer without her. Tyler felt sick at the thought of Scout's babies alone and starving. We have to find them. First things first, Dr. Collins said. We need to stabilize her. The surgery isn't complex, but she'll need time to recover afterward, and it will cost around $800. The figure hung in the air, impossibly large to a family facing foreclosure. Tyler saw his parents exchange a glance, laden with unspoken concerns. I understand this is a significant expense, Dr. Collins continued, noticing their reaction. Especially for a wild animal. I might be able to reduce it somewhat, but our clinic is struggling too. The development company that bought the Henderson property has cut our funding. They used to provide an annual donation as part of their community relations, but that stopped when Evergreen took over. Michael's head snapped up. Evergreen cut your funding? Among other things, Dr. Collins said with barely concealed bitterness. They've also been pressuring the county to rezone the land our sanctuary sits on. Frank Peterson has made it clear they consider wildlife rehabilitation counterproductive to their development plans. Tyler saw something shift in his father's expression, anger, then resolution. Do the surgery, Michael said suddenly. I'll find a way to pay for it. Sarah touched her husband's arm. Michael, how? I'll figure it out, he interrupted, his voice firm. Some things matter more than money. Dr. Collins nodded, seeming to understand something beyond the words exchanged. I'll prep her for surgery right away. It should take about an hour. You're welcome to wait, or I can call when she's in recovery. We'll wait, Tyler said immediately, unable to bear the thought of leaving Scout. While we're waiting, Michael said, his voice tight with controlled anger, I think we should drive back along the property line. Look for more of those traps. Dr. Collins' expression hardened. If you find any, document their locations. Take photos with GPS coordinates if you can. I've been trying to build a case against these illegal trapping operations, but without evidence. We'll find your evidence, Michael promised. While Scout went into surgery, the Whitakers drove along the forest edges bordering the Henderson property, now evergreen development land. Michael moved with the careful precision of a man who had grown up in these woods, stopping occasionally to examine disturbed undergrowth or unusual markings on trees. There, he said finally, pointing to a barely visible metal glint among fallen leaves. Another conibear. This one's set for something larger, probably fox or coyote. Sarah took pictures with her phone while Michael carefully marked the location. They found 3 more traps within a quarter mile, each one documented meticulously. This is systematic, Michael said grimly. They're clearing the wildlife corridor that runs through this entire valley. These animals have nowhere else to go. Tyler watched his father with new eyes. This was a side of Michael Whitaker he hadn't seen in years. Passionate, knowledgeable about the forest, deeply concerned about something beyond their immediate family problems. Why does Frank want to kill all the animals? Tyler asked as they marked yet another trap location. Michael's expression darkened. It's not personal for Frank. It's business. Fewer wildlife conflicts means faster construction, which means quicker profits. Frank's getting paid well to make problems disappear. Including us? Sarah asked quietly. Michael didn't answer immediately, his attention caught by something ahead. Look there. Through the trees, they could see a small clearing where several men were unloading equipment from a truck. Frank Peterson stood among them, his stocky frame unmistakable even at a distance, gesturing toward different areas of the forest. That's private property now. Sarah warned as Michael started forward. "We can't just—" "Stay here with Tyler and Margaret," Michael said, his voice allowing no argument. "I need to have a word with an old friend." Tyler watched anxiously as his father approached the clearing. Frank spotted Michael and separated from the group, meeting him at the edge of the trees. Though they were too far away to hear the conversation, the body language told a clear story. Michael pointing emphatically toward the woods, Frank responding with dismissive gestures, tension building between them until they were nearly nose to nose. "Dad's really angry," Tyler whispered. "Your father cares more about these woods than he lets on," Margaret said, her voice surprisingly clear. "Before you were born, he used to help me release rehabilitated animals. He has a gentle heart beneath all that gruffness." Sarah looked at her mother in surprise. "He never told me that." "Some men are taught to hide the parts of themselves they think make them vulnerable," Margaret replied. "Doesn't mean those parts aren't still there." Michael was walking back now, his expression thunderous. Frank remained at the clearing edge, watching with a mixture of anger and calculation on his weather-beaten face. "What happened?" Sarah asked as Michael rejoined them. "Frank offered me a job again," Michael said tersely. "Said I should be focusing on providing for my family instead of worrying about tree-hugger nonsense. Told me they're breaking ground next week and nothing's going to stop it. Did you tell him about the illegal traps? He knows they're illegal." "He doesn't care." Michael's hands clenched into fists. "He also implied that if I made trouble over this, any chance of employment with Evergreen would disappear, along with any other job prospects in the county." The threat hung in the air, its implications clear. In a small town like Pine Creek, word traveled fast. If Evergreen Development blacklisted Michael, their financial situation would move from dire to hopeless. Tyler looked between his parents, understanding the impossible choice before his father. "What are you going to do, Dad?" Before Michael could answer, Sarah's phone rang. It was Dr. Collins, informing them that Scout's surgery had been successful and they could return to the clinic. The raccoon looked smaller somehow without her injured paw, bandaged and groggy in a recovery cage. Tyler pressed his fingers gently against the mesh, and even in her sedated state, Scout responded, turning toward his voice. "She's strong," Dr. Collins assured them. "She's already showing remarkable resilience. The bigger concern now is finding her kits. Based on her condition, I'd say they're about 4 to 5 weeks old enough to eat solid food but still dependent on their mother." "How do we find them?" Tyler asked. "Raccoons typically nest in hollow trees, abandoned burrows, or other protected spaces. Given that she was trapped near your property, the nest is likely within a quarter-mile radius of that location. Look for trees with cavities, especially near water sources." "We'll start searching as soon as we get home," Michael promised, his earlier confrontation with Frank temporarily set aside in the face of this more immediate concern. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Collins handed Michael a folder. "The invoice," she explained, then added in a lower voice, "but also some information about the legal protections for wildlife corridors in this county. The development plan Evergreen submitted requires a continuous wildlife passage." If they're systematically eliminating wildlife," Michael nodded grimly, understanding the implication. "Thanks for everything." On the drive home, Tyler noticed his father's renewed sense of purpose, a straightening of his shoulders, a determination in his eyes that had been missing for months. Whatever Michael had decided about Frank's threats, it seemed he wasn't going to back down easily. The afternoon was spent combing the woods near where Tyler had found Scout, looking for any sign of raccoon kits. The search was complicated by the need to avoid Evergreen's property, where Frank's crew continued to work, and by Margaret's increasing fatigue, which eventually forced Sarah to take her back to the house. "Let's check by the old creek bed," Michael suggested as the day wore on. "Raccoons like to nest near water, but high enough to avoid flooding," Tyler followed his father, struck by how naturally Michael moved through the forest, pointing out signs Tyler would have missed. Claw marks on trees, disturbed ground near roots, scat that indicated raccoon activity. "How do you know all this stuff, Dad?" Tyler asked as they examined yet another hollow tree. Michael was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother taught me. After the incident with the raccoon kid I found, Bandit, she started taking me along on her rehabilitation releases. Said I had a knack for understanding animal behavior." A faint smile crossed his face. "I wanted to be a wildlife biologist when I grew up." "What happened?" The smile faded. "Life. My father's expectations. Bills to pay. The practical concerns that seem so important until you realize you've lost something essential along the way." He looked at Tyler with unexpected intensity. "Don't ever let anyone tell you that caring is a weakness, son. It's the only strength that really matters." As twilight approached, they had to admit defeat for the day. There was no sign of Scout's kits, and darkness would make further searching impossible. "We'll try again tomorrow," Michael promised as they headed home. "Those kits are out there somewhere. We just have to think like a raccoon mother. Where would she feel her babies were safest?" The question lingered in Tyler's mind as they arrived home to find Sarah and Margaret waiting anxiously on the porch. "Any luck?" Sarah asked, her expression making it clear she already knew the answer. Michael shook his head. "We'll keep looking tomorrow. How's Scout doing?" "Resting. She ate a little when I checked on her. The anesthetic is wearing off." Sarah hesitated. "Tyler, there's something else. Jason Peterson came by while you were out." Tyler tensed. Jason was Frank's son and his chief tormentor at school. "What did he want?" "To tell you that everyone at school knows you rescued a disease-carrying pest, and that his father says people who care more about animals than jobs are what's wrong with this country." Sarah's voice was carefully neutral, but her eyes flashed with maternal anger. "I suggested he return home and consider whether repeating his father's opinions made him a leader or a parrot." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Tyler couldn't help a small smile at the image of his gentle mother delivering such a pointed rebuke. "There's more," Margaret said, her voice uncharacteristically sharp. "While you were searching, I remembered something. When raccoons feel threatened, they sometimes move their young to secondary nest sites. If Scout sensed danger near her primary den, she might have relocated her kits," Michael finished, understanding dawning. "But she was still near enough to the trap site to get caught, which means she was likely in the process of moving them," Sarah added, following the logic. "Some might be in the original nest, others in the new location." Tyler's heart sank. Finding one nest was challenging enough. Now they might need to locate two, and with each passing hour the kit's chances of survival diminished. As if sensing his despair, Scout began chattering loudly from the laundry room, the sound remarkably purposeful despite her weakened state. "She knows we're talking about her babies," Tyler said with absolute certainty. "She's trying to tell us something." The adults exchanged glances, clearly uncertain whether to indulge what seemed like childish anthropomorphism, but Margaret nodded firmly. "Animals communicate in ways we've forgotten how to understand," she said. "Maybe it's time we stopped talking and started listening." The next morning arrived with a steady drizzle that turned the world beyond the Whitakers' windows into a gray blur. Tyler awoke before dawn, his mind still churning with worry over Scout's missing kits. He'd dreamed of tiny raccoons calling for their mother, their cries growing fainter as the night wore on. The dream had felt so real that he jerked awake with tears on his cheeks. In the laundry room, Scout was already alert, pacing her enclosure with remarkable agility despite her recent surgery. When Tyler appeared in the doorway, she immediately approached the side of the cage nearest him, chittering softly. "We're going to find them," Tyler promised, pressing his fingers against the mesh. "Somehow." After a quick breakfast, the family gathered in the kitchen to plan their search strategy. Michael spread out a crude map of the woods surrounding their property, marking the location where Tyler had found Scout with a red X. "If Margaret's right about Scout moving her kits, we need to think about why," Michael said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had rediscovered his expertise. "Raccoons don't relocate without good reason. It's too risky." "The development," Sarah suggested, gesturing toward the Henderson property line on the map. "They've been clearing brush all week. The noise alone would be enough to disturb a raccoon family." Michael nodded. So she was likely moving away from the development, which means he traced a path with his finger, leading deeper into the forest. She'd be heading toward the old quarry. There are plenty of rock formations there that would make good den sites. But she was caught in the trap heading the opposite direction, Tyler pointed out. Like she was going back for something. A contemplative silence fell over the kitchen as they considered the implications. "She might have already moved some kits, but not all of them," Margaret offered. "Or she might have been returning for food she'd stored." Dr. Collins had provided them with a small radio tracking collar for Scout, not to track the raccoon herself, but in hopes that once recovered enough she might lead them to her kits. But that was days away at least. The kits needed help now. "We should split up," Michael decided. "Sarah, you and Margaret check along the creek heading east from where Tyler found Scout. Tyler and I will head toward the quarry. If you find anything, use the walkie-talkies." As they prepared to leave, the house phone rang, a rare occurrence in an age of cell phones. Sarah answered, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "It's Principal Davis," she mouthed to Michael before returning to the call. "Yes, I understand. Of course we'll address it. Thank you for letting us know." She hung up with a troubled sigh. "Tyler's been reported for bringing vermin to school property." "What?" Tyler exclaimed. "I never. Jason Peterson claims you showed off raccoon babies in your backpack during recess yesterday," Sarah explained, "which is obviously impossible since you were with us at the wildlife clinic, but the principal had to call anyway." Michael's expression darkened. "Frank's trying to cause trouble for us. Make us back off. By getting Tyler in trouble at school?" Sarah's disbelief was evident. "That's low, even for Frank." "It's a warning," Michael said grimly. "He's letting us know he can make things difficult for all of us." Tyler felt a cold knot of fear in his stomach. The adults were speaking as if Frank Peterson was dangerous, not just unpleasant. "Are we in trouble, Dad?" Michael knelt to meet his son's eyes. "No, Tyler. We're doing the right thing, and no one can make that wrong. Remember that." He stood, decision made. "Let's find those kits. That's what matters now." The rain had softened to a misty drizzle by the time they entered the woods, making the forest floor slick and treacherous. Tyler stayed close to his father, watching carefully as Michael examined tree hollows, brush piles, and rocky crevices. "Raccoons are creatures of convenience," Michael explained as they searched. "They don't dig their own burrows if they can find existing shelter. Look for places that are protected from rain and predators, but still allow easy access." The quarry appeared through the trees as a great gouged-out semicircle in the earth, long abandoned and partially reclaimed by nature. Rainwater had collected in the deepest part, forming a small, still pond. The rocky walls were dotted with crevices and overhangs, perfect den sites for a variety of wildlife. "This place always gave me the creeps when I was a kid," Michael admitted as they began scanning the quarry edge. "Your grandmother used to say it was because I could sense the wound in the earth where humans had taken more than they should." Tyler nodded, understanding exactly what his grandmother meant. There was something melancholy about the quarry, beautiful in its recovery, but still bearing the scars of human intervention. "Dad," Tyler said suddenly, pointing to a narrow ledge about 15 feet up the quarry wall. Look there." A small pile of what looked like shredded material was visible on the ledge, with suspicious dark smudges around the opening of a crevice. "Good eye," Michael said approvingly. "Those could be raccoon tracks. The soil's dark enough there to show them even with the rain." The ledge was accessible via a rough natural staircase of protruding rocks. Michael went first, testing each foothold before motioning Tyler to follow. The climb was precarious but manageable, and soon they were peering into the crevice. "Flashlight," Michael whispered, holding out his hand. Tyler passed him the small flashlight they'd brought. Michael shone it into the darkness, revealing a small chamber lined with dried leaves, scraps of cloth, and what looked suspiciously like insulation material. "This is definitely a raccoon nest," Michael confirmed. "Recently used, judging by the fresh droppings, but no kits," Tyler finished, heart sinking. "Not anymore. But they were here." Michael pointed to tiny tracks in the softer material at the back of the den. "See the size of those prints? Much smaller than an adult." "So where are they now?" Michael didn't answer immediately, sweeping the flashlight around the den one more time before backing out onto the ledge. If this was Scout's original den and she was relocating because of the development noise, a sudden shout from below cut him off. Frank Peterson stood at the edge of the quarry pond, 3 men from his crew flanking him. Even from a distance, Tyler could see the anger in his stance. "Whitaker," Frank called up, "you're trespassing on evergreen property." Michael straightened, keeping Tyler slightly behind him on the narrow ledge. "This is county land, Frank. The quarry was never part of the Henderson sale." "Check your facts," Frank shot back. "Evergreen's purchase included the quarry and water rights. You're on private property, and you're interfering with official business." "What official business would that be?" Michael's voice remained calm, but Tyler could feel the tension in his father's body. "Setting more illegal traps? Clearing protected wildlife?" Frank's face darkened. "I'm giving you one chance, Michael. For old time's sake, take your boy and leave. Forget what you think you know. There's still a job waiting if you decide to be practical." "And if I don't?" Frank spread his hands in a gesture that managed to be both apologetic and threatening. "Then I'd have to report you for trespassing, endangering a minor with this unsafe climbing and interfering with a legal development project. Wouldn't look good for a family already facing foreclosure. Might even trigger a visit from Child Protective Services, given your financial instability." Tyler felt his father go completely still beside him. When Michael spoke again, his voice was so low Tyler could barely hear it. "Are you threatening my family, Frank?" "I'm offering you a way out," Frank replied. "More than most would do. But the offer expires now. What's it going to be?" For a terrible moment, Tyler thought his father might back down. The stakes were suddenly so much higher than a raccoon family. This was about their own family's security, their home, his father's future. Then Michael's hand found Tyler's shoulder, squeezing gently. "We're leaving," he called down to Frank. "But this isn't over." Frank's smile was unpleasant. "Smarter than I gave you credit for, Whitaker." They descended carefully from the ledge, Tyler's heart pounding with a confused mixture of fear and disappointment. As they reached the quarry floor, Frank and his men moved aside to let them pass, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "You're making the right choice," Frank said as they passed. "Family has to come first." Michael didn't respond, guiding Tyler away from the quarry with a hand firmly on his shoulder. They walked in silence until they were well out of earshot. "I'm sorry, Dad," Tyler finally said, unable to bear the quiet any longer. "For what?" "For making you choose between the raccoons and our family." Michael stopped walking and turned to face his son, his expression intense. "Listen to me carefully, Tyler. I didn't choose our family over the raccoons. I chose to protect you in that moment from a dangerous situation. There's a difference. But Frank said, Frank threatened us because he's scared, Michael interrupted. People don't threaten unless they feel cornered, which means we're on to something important. Tyler blinked, trying to process this perspective. So, we're not giving up? A slow smile spread across Michael's face, the first genuine smile Tyler had seen in months. Not by a long shot, but we need to be smarter about how we fight this battle. As they resumed walking, Michael pulled out his cell phone. I'm going to call Dr. Collins. She needs to know about Frank's claim that the quarry belongs to Evergreen. Something doesn't add up there. The call was brief but intense, with Michael explaining the confrontation and Dr. Collins providing information Tyler couldn't quite follow about county land records and water rights. When Michael hung up, his expression was grimly satisfied. Frank's lying, he told Tyler. The quarry was specifically excluded from the Henderson sale because it's part of the county water table protection zone. It can't be privately owned or developed. Dr. Collins has the original survey maps to prove it. So he was bluffing about having us arrested for trespassing? Yes, and that means he's desperately trying to keep people away from the quarry. Michael's pace quickened. We need to get back there, but not alone, and not without evidence of what they're doing. When they arrived home, they found Sarah and Margaret already returned, their search along the creek having proved fruitless. As Michael recounted their confrontation with Frank, Sarah's expression shifted from concern to outrage. He threatened our family? Over raccoons? Her disbelief was palpable. Not over raccoons, Michael corrected. Over whatever he's hiding at the quarry. It has to be connected to why Scout was moving her kits. A sudden commotion from the laundry room interrupted them. Scout was making an unprecedented racket, chittering and scratching at her enclosure with increasing desperation. She knows something's wrong, Tyler said, hurrying to check on her. Scout was in a state of high agitation, circling her enclosure and repeatedly pressing against the side facing the woods. When she saw Tyler, her behavior became even more frantic, as if trying to communicate something of urgent importance. She wants out, Margaret said from the doorway, her eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. She's trying to show us where her babies are. Dr. Collins had been clear. Scout needed at least 3 days of recovery before attempting any kind of tracking effort. But watching the raccoons' desperate attempts to communicate, Tyler wondered if they had that kind of time. Frank and his crew are still at the quarry, Michael said, thinking aloud. If Scout's kits are hidden somewhere there, the implication hung in the air, unspoken, but understood by all. If Frank was willing to threaten a family over trespassing, what would he do to helpless raccoon kits that stood in the way of development? We need more help, Sarah decided, surprising everyone with her sudden authority. This isn't just about Scout anymore. If Frank is illegally claiming county land and setting prohibited traps, that's a matter for local authorities. Who do you think approves Frank's permits? Michael asked bitterly. Half the county board are investors in evergreen development. They're not going to help us. Then we go above them, Sarah insisted. State environmental protection, wildlife conservation officers. Dr. Collins must have contacts. As the adults debated strategy, Tyler remained with Scout, watching her increasingly frantic behavior. A terrible suspicion was forming in his mind. Not just that Scout knew where her kits were, but that she sensed they were in immediate danger. The raccoon suddenly became completely still, her sensitive ears pricked forward. A moment later, Tyler heard it too, the distant sound of heavy machinery starting up. "Dad!" Tyler called, a note of panic in his voice. "They're doing something at the quarry!" Michael appeared in the doorway, head tilted to listen. His expression hardened as he recognized the sound. "Earth-moving equipment. They're starting clearing operations." "But you said the quarry is protected," Tyler protested. "It is, which means they're trying to destroy evidence before anyone can stop them." Michael's decision was immediate. "Sarah, call Dr. Collins. Tell her to bring whatever wildlife officers or environmental authorities she can reach. Margaret, stay here with Scout. Tyler and I are going back to the quarry." "Not without me," Sarah said firmly. "If they're threatening our family, we face them together." Tyler had never seen his mother like this, determined, fierce, ready to fight. It was as if the Sarah who had once worked at a wildlife sanctuary was re-emerging from beneath years of exhaustion and compromise. "We need evidence," Michael said as they prepared to leave. "Photos, video, anything that proves what they're doing." Sarah held up her phone. "Already on it, and I've texted the location to Dr. Collins." As they headed toward the door, Tyler felt a sharp pain in his chest, the warning sign he'd been taught to recognize. He paused, reaching automatically for the medication in his pocket. "Tyler?" Sarah noticed immediately, her doctor's instincts alert. "I'm okay," he assured her, swallowing the small pill. "Just need a minute." His parents exchanged a worried glance. "Maybe you should stay with Grandma," Sarah suggested gently. Tyler shook his head firmly. "Scout trusted me. I have to help find her babies." After a moment's hesitation, Michael nodded. "Stay close to us. If you feel anything at all, you tell us immediately." "Promise?" "Promise," Tyler agreed, relief flooding him. He couldn't bear to be left behind, not when Scout's kits needed him. As they slipped out the back door, none of them noticed Margaret watching from the window, her eyes unusually clear and focused. Nor did they see her turn decisively toward the laundry room, a set of keys clutched in her gnarled hand. The sound of machinery grew louder as they approached the quarry, accompanied now by shouted instructions and the beeping of vehicles in reverse. Through the trees they could see dust rising from where an excavator was digging into the far wall, the same wall where Michael and Tyler had discovered the abandoned raccoon den. "They're destroying it," Tyler whispered, horror-struck. "They're destroying everything." Michael pulled them behind a large oak at the quarry's edge. "We need to document exactly what they're doing before we confront them." "Sarah, can you film from here?" Sarah nodded, raising her phone to capture the scene. Frank was visible directing operations, gesturing toward different areas of the quarry wall. What appeared to be a small cave or crevice was being systematically collapsed by the excavator. "That wasn't there earlier," Michael said, frowning. "They've uncovered something." "Or they're burying something," Sarah suggested grimly. As they watched, one of Frank's men approached with what looked like a large metal drum. The excavator paused its work while the drum was positioned in the freshly dug hole. "Are they dumping something?" Tyler asked, confusion mixing with his fear. Michael's expression was thunderous. "Looks like it. And if they're hiding barrels in protected watershed land, that's a federal offense," Sarah finished. "Environmental contamination of a water source." Before they could discuss further, a commotion erupted from the far side of the quarry. Margaret appeared at the edge, Scout cradled in her arms despite the raccoon's agitated state. "Mom!" Sarah gasped. "What is she doing?" Margaret's voice carried across the quarry, strong and clear in a way it hadn't been in years. "Stop what you're doing right now. You're destroying a protected habitat." Frank and his crew froze, clearly shocked by the appearance of an elderly woman holding a three-legged raccoon. Then Frank's surprise gave way to anger. "Mrs. Wheeler, you need to leave immediately. This is a construction zone." "This is county watershed land," Margaret shot back, her voice carrying the authority of her years as a conservationist. "And you know it, Frank Peterson. I was on the board that designated it protected 20 years ago." Frank gestured to two of his men who started moving toward Margaret. Scout began struggling in the elderly woman's arms, chittering frantically toward something near the excavator. "The kits," Tyler whispered, sudden understanding dawning. "They're in that cave they're destroying." Without thinking of the consequences, Tyler broke from their hiding place and ran toward the excavator, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Stop! There are baby raccoons in there!" "Tyler!" Sarah cried, horror in her voice. Michael was already moving, sprinting after his son with a speed born of desperation. Sarah followed, phone still recording, capturing the chaos that erupted as Tyler reached the partially collapsed cave entrance and began scrabbling at the loose dirt. "Get that kid out of here!" Frank shouted, real panic in his voice now. The excavator operator, startled by the sudden appearance of a child in his work area, shut down the machine. The sudden silence was broken only by Tyler's frantic digging and Scout's increasingly desperate cries. "I can hear them," Tyler called, his hands bleeding from the rough stone. "They're in here." Michael reached his son's side, adding his stronger arms to the effort. "Move back, Tyler. Let me." Together, they cleared enough debris to reveal a small opening. Inside, barely visible in the darkness, several pairs of tiny eyes reflected the daylight. The chittering from within matched Scout's calls perfectly, mother and babies recognizing each other. "4 kits," Michael confirmed, relief evident in his voice. "They're alive." Frank appeared beside them, his face mottled with rage. "You're trespassing on a work site. This is criminal interference." "This is a protected habitat on county land," Sarah countered, still filming. "And you're attempting to bury toxic waste in a watershed. That's what's criminal here, Frank." Frank's expression shifted from anger to calculation. "You can't prove anything." "We have it all on video," Sarah replied steadily. "The barrels, the excavation, your men attempting to bury them in protected land. Not to mention the illegal traps we've documented." For a moment it seemed Frank might physically challenge them, his body language aggressive, fists clenched. Then the sound of approaching vehicles broke the tension. Dr. Collins appeared at the quarry edge, accompanied by 2 uniformed wildlife officers and what appeared to be a county environmental inspector. "Perfect timing," Sarah called up to them, relief evident in her voice. As the officials made their way down to the quarry floor, Frank's crew began backing away, clearly sensing the shifting tide. Frank himself stood his ground, though his confidence was visibly faltering. "This is all a misunderstanding," he began as the wildlife officers approached. "We're conducting authorized development activities." "On county watershed land," one of the officers interrupted skeptically. "With illegal killing traps and what appears to be unauthorized waste disposal?" While the confrontation unfolded, Tyler and Michael continued carefully excavating the Raccoon kits. Dr. Collins joined them, medical bag in hand, ready to assess the tiny creature's condition. "They're dehydrated but otherwise seem okay," she confirmed after a preliminary examination. "They've been without their mother for at least 36 hours, but raccoons are remarkably resilient." Margaret approached slowly, still cradling Scout. The mother raccoon was calmer now, sensing her babies were being rescued rather than harmed. When the first kit was gently extracted from the collapsed den, Scout chittered softly, straining toward her baby. "Let's get them all to safety first," Dr. Collins advised. "Then we can reunite the family properly at the clinic." As the last kit was carefully removed and placed in a transport carrier, Tyler felt a profound sense of accomplishment wash over him. Against all odds, against threats and intimidation, they had saved Scout's family. But the victory came at a cost. The exertion and stress had taken their toll, and Tyler felt the familiar tightness returning to his chest, more intense than before. He tried to take a deep breath, but found he couldn't get enough air. "Mom," he managed to gasp, reaching for Sarah as his vision began to blur at the edges. Sarah turned, her triumph instantly replaced by maternal alarm. "Tyler!" The world tilted sideways as Tyler felt his knees buckle. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Scout's intelligent eyes watching him from Margaret's arms, somehow conveying both gratitude and concern. Then, nothing. The fluorescent lights of Pine Creek Memorial Hospital cast harsh shadows across the waiting room where Michael and Margaret sat in tense silence. It had been 4 hours since Tyler collapsed at the quarry. 4 hours of doctors speaking in hushed, urgent tones while machines beeped and medication flowed through IV lines into Tyler's small arm. Sarah hadn't left their son's side, her status as a doctor at this very hospital ensuring she could remain present during every test, every consultation. Michael had seen the fear in her eyes when they loaded Tyler into the ambulance, not just a mother's fear, but a doctor's recognition of something seriously wrong. "He'll pull through," Margaret said, her voice stronger and more lucid than it had been in months. "That boy has more heart than anyone I've ever known." Michael nodded wordlessly, unable to voice the fear that it was precisely Tyler's heart that was the problem. The stress of the confrontation, the physical exertion of digging out the Raccoon kits, the emotional intensity of the past few days, it had all been too much for Tyler's fragile cardiac condition. The double doors swung open, and Sarah emerged, still in her hastily donned hospital scrubs. Michael stood immediately, searching her face for any sign of good news. "He's stable," she said before he could ask, fatigue evident in every line of her body. "But Dr. Ramirez wants to run more tests." His heart showed some concerning irregularities during the episode. "What kind of irregularities?" Michael asked, medical terminology beyond his grasp, but the implications all too clear. Sarah hesitated, the doctor in her warring with the mother who wanted to shield her family from painful truths. They're concerned about structural abnormalities that weren't visible in his previous examinations. "Tyler might need surgery, Michael." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications beyond the medical. Surgery meant specialists. Specialists meant costs far beyond their insurance coverage. Costs meant whatever he needs, Michael said firmly, pushing aside the financial panic rising in his chest. "We'll find a way." Sarah's smile was wan but genuine. "That's what I told Dr. Ramirez." She glanced toward the waiting room doors. "Where are Scout and the kits?" "Dr. Collins took them to the wildlife clinic," Margaret answered. "They're all doing well, according to her last update. The kits were dehydrated, but otherwise unharmed. A small relief in the midst of their greater worry." Michael ran a hand through his hair, realizing he was still covered in dirt from the quarry. "And Frank? The environmental officers?" "Jason's father was arrested," an unexpected voice announced from the doorway. They turned to find Jason Peterson standing awkwardly at the entrance to the waiting room, his usual swagger replaced by uncertain shuffling. The 16-year-old looked both younger and older than his years in that moment, a child confused by adult complexities, yet forced to confront uncomfortable truths. "Jason?" Sarah acknowledged, her tone carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" The boy fidgeted with the zipper of his jacket. "I came to see if Tyler's okay. Everyone at school's talking about what happened." "Word travels fast," Michael observed, unsurprised. In a town the size of Pine Creek, dramatic events rarely remain private for long. "They're saying my dad was dumping toxic waste," Jason continued, a question in his voice. "That he threatened your family and tried to kill baby raccoons." That can't be true, right?" The naked hope in the boy's face, the desperate need to believe his father couldn't be guilty of such things, struck Michael like a physical blow. How many times had he himself defended his own father's harsh actions, made excuses for cruelty disguised as toughening up? "Jason," Michael said gently, "sometimes adults make bad choices, especially when money and pride are involved. It doesn't mean they're bad people through and through." It wasn't exactly an answer, but the boy seemed to deflate nonetheless, reality settling on his young shoulders. "Is Tyler going to be okay?" Sarah stepped forward, her doctor's instinct to comfort overriding any resentment she might feel toward Frank Peterson's son. "We're doing everything we can for him. His heart condition was aggravated by the stress, but Tyler's strong." Jason nodded, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "Could you give him this?" "When he wakes up?" He held it out to Sarah, his expression a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. "It's just, I wanted to say sorry for the stuff at school." Sarah accepted the note with a gentle smile. "I'll make sure he gets it." After Jason left, they were allowed to see Tyler briefly. He lay pale and small in the hospital bed, monitors tracking his vital signs with steady beeps that should have been reassuring but instead emphasized the fragility of the situation. He was conscious but groggy, managing a weak smile when he saw his family. "Did they save the kits?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "All 4 of them," Michael confirmed, squeezing his son's hand gently. "Dr. Collins says they're already eating solid food and responding well to treatment." Tyler's smile widened slightly. "And Scout?" "Watching over them like a proper mama," Margaret said, leaning in to brush Tyler's hair from his forehead. "She's healing well, too." "What about the quarry?" "And Frank?" Sarah and Michael exchanged a glance, silently debating how much to share given Tyler's condition. "The environmental officers found 3 barrels of industrial waste already buried," Sarah finally explained, keeping her tone matter-of-fact. "They've launched a full investigation into Evergreen Development's practices. Frank is facing multiple charges, including illegal dumping and wildlife endangerment." Tyler absorbed this information with a solemnity beyond his years. "Is Jason okay?" The question caught them all by surprise. That Tyler, in his own precarious situation, would worry about the well-being of his bully. "Jason came by earlier," Sarah told him, producing the folded note. "He left this for you." Tyler's fingers were weak as he unfolded the paper. The message inside was brief but clear. "I'm sorry for everything. What you did was brave. Hope you get better. Jason." A small smile touched Tyler's lips before his eyelids grew heavy. "Tell him it's okay," he murmured as he drifted back to sleep, the day's events finally overcoming his determination to stay awake. They left him to rest, returning to the waiting room where Dr. Ramirez was waiting with results from the latest tests. The cardiologist's expression was grave as he led them to a private consultation room. "Tyler has what we call hypertrophic cardiomyopathy," he explained, showing them images of Tyler's heart on a tablet screen. "It's a condition where the heart muscle becomes abnormally thick, making it harder for the heart to pump blood effectively." "But this wasn't detected in his previous examinations," Sarah said, her medical training warring with maternal disbelief. "The condition can develop progressively, especially during growth spurts," Dr. Ramirez explained gently. "In Tyler's case, it appears to have worsened significantly in recent months." "What are the treatment options?" Michael asked, cutting to what mattered most. "Doctor." Ramirez's hesitation spoke volumes. Medication can help manage symptoms, but given the severity of Tyler's condition and this recent episode, I believe surgical intervention is necessary. Specifically, a septal myectomy to remove part of the thickened heart muscle and improve blood flow. "That's open heart surgery," Sarah whispered, the color draining from her face. "Yes, it's a complex procedure, and I would recommend we transfer Tyler to Atlanta Children's Hospital. They have pediatric cardiac specialists with extensive experience in this exact procedure." Michael forced himself to ask the question hanging over them. "What are the costs involved?" Dr. Ramirez's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "Even with insurance, your out-of-pocket expenses would be substantial. We're looking at somewhere between $50,000 and $70,000. The figure hit Michael like a physical blow. With their house already in foreclosure, with no job prospects, with savings long since depleted, it might as well have been $50 million. "There are financial assistance programs," Dr. Ramirez continued, clearly sensing their distress. and the hospital can work with you on payment plans. But all three adults in the room knew the reality. Payment plans wouldn't matter if they had no income, no home. Financial assistance rarely covered more than a fraction of such substantial medical costs. "When would he need the surgery?" Sarah asked, her voice steadier than Michael expected. "Ideally, within the next 2 weeks. I can manage his condition medically in the meantime, but the risk of another, potentially more serious episode remains high." 2 weeks. 2 weeks to somehow find $50,000. 2 weeks to save their son's life. After Dr. Ramirez left, the three of them sat in stunned silence. Margaret reached out to take both Sarah's and Michael's hands in her gnarled ones. "We'll find a way," she said with quiet certainty. "This family has faced worse." But had they? Michael couldn't recall any challenge more daunting than this impossible equation. A life-saving surgery they couldn't possibly afford, a ticking clock counting down to consequences too terrible to contemplate. The following days passed in a blur of hospital visits, consultations, and increasingly desperate attempts to secure the funds needed for Tyler's surgery. Sarah took a leave of absence from her position at the hospital, focusing entirely on Tyler's care and navigating the labyrinthine world of medical financial assistance. Michael spent hours on the phone with insurance companies, banks, and loan officers, each conversation ending with the same gentle but firm rejection. Their house foreclosure notice, temporarily forgotten in the chaos of Scout's rescue and Tyler's collapse, arrived with finality. They had 30 days to vacate the property. The timing couldn't have been worse. Recovering from major heart surgery, Tyler would need a stable, stress-free environment. Instead, they faced homelessness at the very moment their son would be most vulnerable. News of the Whitakers' situation spread quickly through Pine Creek. Casseroles appeared on their doorstep, along with cards and small donations from neighbors and Sarah's colleagues. The local church organized a prayer vigil. Tyler's classmates made a giant Get Well card signed by every student, including notably Jason Peterson. But community goodwill, while touching, couldn't begin to approach the mountain of money required for the surgery. A GoFundMe campaign organized by Dr. Collins stalled at just over $5,000, generous for a small town during economic hardship, but barely a dent in what they needed. Meanwhile, at the wildlife clinic, Scout and her kits thrived under Dr. Collins' care. The mother Raccoon's surgical site healed cleanly, and she adapted to life on 3 legs with remarkable resilience. Her babies grew stronger daily, their playful antics documented in photos and videos that Dr. Collins shared with Tyler during his hospital stay. "She asks about you," Dr. Collins told Tyler during one visit, showing him footage of Scout standing on her hind legs, sniffing curiously at the camera. In her own way, Tyler's smile, rare since his collapse, briefly brightened his pale face. "When can I see her?" "Soon," Dr. Collins promised, though they all knew the reality was more complicated. With Tyler's compromised immune system, direct contact with wildlife posed risks they couldn't afford to take. A week after Tyler's collapse, Michael received an unexpected call from the county prosecutor's office. The investigation into Frank Peterson and Evergreen Development had expanded significantly, with evidence of environmental violations dating back years. The prosecutor wanted Michael's testimony regarding the confrontation at the quarry and the illegal traps found on their property. "They're building a case for criminal negligence and environmental contamination," Michael explained to Sarah that evening as they sat in Tyler's hospital room while he slept. "If convicted, Evergreen could face millions in fines." "That won't help us in time," Sarah replied, voicing what they both knew. Justice for the environment would come too late to save their son. The following day brought even more devastating news. Dr. Ramirez called them into his office, his expression grave. Tyler's latest tests show accelerated deterioration, he said without preamble. We need to move up the timeline for surgery. I've spoken with the team at Atlanta and they can take him next week. Next week? Sarah repeated, the color draining from her face. But we haven't secured the funding yet. We need more time. Dr. Ramirez's expression was compassionate but firm. Time is the one thing Tyler doesn't have, Sarah. His heart can't wait. That night, after Tyler had fallen asleep, Michael stood at the hospital window staring out at the parking lot below. The autumn moon cast long shadows across the pavement, turning familiar shapes into ghostly outlines. He felt Sarah's presence before she spoke, her reflection appearing beside his in the glass. "Frank Peterson called," she said quietly. "He's offering to pay for Tyler's surgery. All of it." Michael turned, disbelief warring with desperate hope. "What? Why would he?" Apparently, Jason told him everything. About Tyler's condition, about the surgery costs. Sarah's voice was carefully neutral. "Frank says it's not charity. He calls it making things right." The offer hung between them, tempting and terrible all at once. Money that would save their son's life, offered by the man who had threatened their family, who had illegally dumped toxic waste, who had tried to destroy a wildlife habitat for profit. There would be conditions, Michael guessed, knowing Frank Peterson too well to believe in simple generosity. Sarah nodded reluctantly. "He wants us to drop any charges related to the confrontation at the quarry, to tell the prosecutor it was all a misunderstanding. To lie, in other words, to help him escape responsibility." "Yes." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "But Tyler would get his surgery." The choice before them was impossible. Their son's life against their integrity, their principles, their responsibility to the community and environment they'd fought to protect. How could they choose? How could any parent choose? "We need to think about this," Michael said finally, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "There's nothing to think about." Margaret's voice came from the doorway, startling them both. She stood leaning on her cane, her eyes clear and fierce in the dim light. "You cannot sacrifice your principles for expediency, not even for this." "This is Tyler's life we're talking about, Mom," Sarah responded, an edge of desperation in her voice. "And what lesson would you be teaching him by accepting Frank's blood money?" Margaret countered. "That it's acceptable to look the other way while someone poisons the land and water that sustains us all, as long as the price is right?" "It's not that simple," Michael began. "It's exactly that simple," Margaret interrupted. "There are some compromises from which you can never recover your soul." The harsh truth of her words filled the room. They all knew she was right, even as the parental instinct to protect their child at any cost screamed against such idealistic stands. "Then what do we do?" Sarah asked, tears filling her eyes. "How do we save our son?" Before either Michael or Margaret could answer, a nurse appeared in the doorway, her expression urgent. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, Tyler's asking for you. He's quite agitated." They rushed to Tyler's room to find him sitting up in bed, eyes wide with alarm, monitors beeping in protest at his elevated heart rate. "Tyler, honey, you need to calm down," Sarah said, immediately shifting into doctor mode as she checked the monitors. "What's wrong?" "I heard you," Tyler said, his voice thin but determined, "about Mr. Peterson's offer." Michael exchanged a startled glance with Sarah. They had been speaking quietly, but the hospital walls were apparently thinner than they'd realized. "We're just exploring all options," Michael said carefully. Tyler shook his head firmly. "No, you can't take his money, not if it means letting him get away with what he did." "Tyler," Sarah began. "Scout trusted me," Tyler interrupted, tears filling his eyes. "All those animals trusted us to protect them. We can't betray that trust, not even for me." The simple, uncompromising moral clarity of a 10-year-old boy cut through all the adult rationalizations and desperate justifications. In that moment, Michael saw his son for what he truly was, not just a child needing protection, but a person of profound courage and conviction. "Okay," Michael said softly, taking Tyler's hand. "We won't take the money. I promise." Tyler's relief was visible, his tense shoulders relaxing slightly. "We'll find another way," he said with a child's faith. "There's always another way." But as Tyler drifted back to sleep, the weight of that promise settled heavily on Michael's shoulders. He had just committed to rejecting the only concrete solution they had, with no alternative in sight. The surgery was now just days away, and they were no closer to finding the money than they had been a week ago. As they left Tyler's room, Dr. Ramirez was waiting for them in the hallway, his expression grave. "I've just reviewed Tyler's latest echocardiogram," he said, without preamble. "The situation is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. We need to move him to Atlanta tomorrow, not next week." "Tomorrow?" Sarah repeated, her medical training unable to mask her maternal panic. "But the financial arrangements—" "I understand your concerns," Dr. Ramirez interrupted gently, "but this can't wait. We'll transport him to Atlanta in the morning and let their financial department work with you on the details." As the doctor walked away, Michael felt the last threads of hope slipping through his fingers. Tomorrow. They had until tomorrow to find $50,000, or they would be forced to make an impossible choice: break their promise to Tyler, or risk losing him entirely. The hospital corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before them, bright and sterile and offering no solutions. Sarah's hand found his, clutching with desperate strength. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. For the first time in his life, Michael Whitaker had no answer at all. The morning of Tyler's transfer to Atlanta arrived with a soft drizzle that matched the Whitakers' somber mood. They had spent a sleepless night alternating between desperate phone calls and silent prayers, seeking some miraculous solution to their financial predicament. None had materialized. Frank Peterson's offer remained the only concrete possibility for funding Tyler's surgery, and they had promised their son they wouldn't accept it. "The ambulance will be here at 10, Dr. Ramirez informed them during his early morning rounds. His expression was sympathetic but resolute. "The surgical team in Atlanta has been briefed on Tyler's case. They're prepared to operate tomorrow morning." Sarah nodded mechanically, her doctor's understanding of medical urgency warring with a mother's helplessness. "And if we can't secure the funding by then?" Dr. Ramirez's hesitation spoke volumes. "They'll begin with stabilizing treatment while the financial department works with you." "But the surgery itself—" He left the implication hanging. Michael stood at the window, watching raindrops trace crooked paths down the glass. In the parking lot below, life continued with mundane normality, hospital staff changing shifts, visitors arriving with flowers and gift shop balloons, the everyday rhythm of a world that hadn't stopped turning just because the Whitakers had. "I need some air," he said abruptly, unable to bear the sterile confines of the hospital room any longer. "I'll be back before the ambulance arrives." Outside, the rain had intensified, but Michael welcomed it. The cold droplets against his skin, a physical sensation to ground him amid the emotional turmoil. He walked without direction, barely noticing as he left the hospital grounds and headed toward the center of Pine Creek. The town square was quiet in the morning rain, most shops still closed or just opening. Michael found himself outside the Pine Creek Gazette office, where a newspaper rack displayed the day's headline, "Evergreen Development Under Federal Investigation, Local Man Faces Multiple Charges." Frank Peterson's arraignment photo stared back at him, the once confident hunting guide now looking haggard and defeated. "Quite the scandal, isn't it?" a voice remarked from behind him. Michael turned to find Eliza Thornton, the Gazette's elderly editor and Pine Creek's unofficial historian, unlocking the newspaper office door. "Morning, Eliza," Michael acknowledged with a nod. "You're out early," she observed, sharp eyes taking in his rumpled clothes and unshaven face. "Heard about your boy. Terrible situation." News traveled fast in small towns. Michael was no longer surprised by how much people knew about his family's troubles. "He's being transferred to Atlanta today for surgery." Eliza's expression softened. "The fund at the church reached 12,000 as of yesterday." "Not enough, I know, but this town cares about Tyler." The kindness of neighbors was simultaneously touching and heartbreaking. Genuine generosity that still fell catastrophically short of what they needed. "I appreciate that," Michael said simply, unable to find words adequate to the situation. Eliza hesitated, then gestured to the office door. "Come in for a minute. There's something you should see." Curious, despite his preoccupation, Michael followed her into the small newspaper office. The space was a testament to old-school journalism, filing cabinets lining the walls, the air smelling of paper and ink despite the digital age. Eliza led him to her cluttered desk and unlocked a drawer. "I've been digging into Evergreen's history since the scandal broke," she explained, retrieving a file folder. "What they've done at the quarry isn't isolated. There's a pattern going back years. Cutting corners, environmental violations, using political connections to avoid consequences." "I'm not surprised," Michael said wearily. "But I don't see how this helps Tyler." Eliza laid several documents on her desk. "Look at this land acquisition record from 3 years ago. Evergreen purchased the old Miller farm for their first development phase. The same week, the county supervisor who approved their permits bought a vacation home in Florida. A vacation home that cost exactly $50,000 more than his annual salary would support." Michael scanned the documents, understanding dawning. "You're suggesting a bribe." "I'm suggesting a pattern of corruption that federal investigators would be very interested in," Eliza corrected, "especially with the current case building against them." "But again, how does this help my son?" Eliza met his gaze steadily. "Information is valuable, Michael, especially to those with something to lose. And Evergreen's parent company is publicly traded. Their stock has already dropped 15% since the quarry scandal broke. If evidence of systematic bribery became public." The implication hung in the air between them. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with his rain-soaked clothes. "You're suggesting I blackmail them?" "I'm suggesting you consider all your options," Eliza replied calmly. "Sometimes fighting fire with fire is the only choice when the house is burning down." Michael stared at the documents, moral certainty wavering in the face of desperate need. Was this any different from accepting Frank's offer? Both involved compromising his principles. Both meant putting a price on justice. "I need to think about this," he said finally, turning toward the door. "Don't think too long," Eliza called after him. "Some choices have expiration dates." The rain had stopped by the time Michael returned to the hospital, leaving behind that peculiar freshness that follows a cleansing downpour. In the lobby, he found Dr. Collins waiting, her expression simultaneously concerned and excited. "I've been trying to reach you," she said, falling into step beside him. "Something's happened with Scout." Michael's heart sank. With everything happening with Tyler, he'd had little mental space to worry about the Raccoon family. "Is she all right?" "She's fine, better than fine, but she's been acting strangely since yesterday. Agitated, trying to escape her enclosure, extremely focused on something. This morning, she managed to open the latch on her cage, which should have been impossible with her recovery limitations." Despite everything, Michael felt a small smile tug at his lips. "Tyler always said she was smart." "Smart doesn't begin to cover it," Dr. Collins replied, shaking her head in wonder. "When I discovered her missing, I panicked, until I found her in the supply room, pulling apart an old cabinet we rarely use. Inside was a box I'd completely forgotten about." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. This was inside, along with documents showing it was left in trust for wildlife rehabilitation 20 years ago, with specific instructions not to use it unless absolutely necessary. Michael took the pouch, puzzled. Inside was an old-fashioned brooch, ornate gold filigree surrounding what appeared to be a large emerald. "I don't understand," he said, looking to Dr. Collins for explanation. "What does this have to do with Scout?" "The documents were signed by Margaret Wheeler," Dr. Collins said softly. "Your mother-in-law. She established a trust for the Wildlife Center with this brooch as collateral. Family heirloom jewelry, she said, was to be sold only in dire circumstances." Michael stared at the antique piece, realization dawning. "And Scout somehow knew it was there. That's not possible." "I know how it sounds," Dr. Collins acknowledged, "but I've worked with wildlife for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this raccoon. The way she watches, the way she seems to understand, it's as if she knows exactly what's happening with Tyler." "Margaret has mentioned something similar," Michael admitted. "That Scout reminds her of a raccoon she rehabilitated years ago. That she recognizes those eyes." Dr. Collins nodded thoughtfully. "Animals pass down knowledge through generations in ways we're only beginning to understand, especially raccoons. They're among the most intelligent non-primates, with problem-solving abilities that rival primates in some contexts." "Are you suggesting this is the descendant of a raccoon Margaret rehabilitated?" "I'm suggesting that in moments of crisis, we sometimes find help from unexpected sources," Dr. Collins replied diplomatically. "I had the brooch appraised this morning by a jeweler friend. It's Georgian era, with a Colombian emerald of exceptional quality. Conservative estimate puts its value at $60,000 to $70,000. The amount hung in the air between them, almost exactly what they needed for Tyler's surgery." "I can't take this," Michael protested weakly. "It belongs to the Wildlife Trust." "The trust Margaret established specifically for emergencies," Dr. Collins corrected gently. "I've already spoken with the board. They've unanimously agreed to release it for Tyler's medical expenses, with the understanding that when you're back on your feet, you'll help us rebuild the fund." Michael stared at the brooch, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "How did Margaret even have something this valuable?" "She comes from old Virginia money, though you'd never know it from how she lives," Dr. Collins explained. "The documents indicate this was her grandmother's, passed down through generations of Wheeler women." A memory surfaced, Margaret once mentioning an heirloom she'd put to better use than sitting in a jewelry box. Michael had assumed she'd sold it for her conservation work. Instead, she'd created a safety net that would now save her grandson's life. "I don't know what to say," Michael managed, his voice rough with emotion. "You don't need to say anything," Dr. Collins assured him. "Just get Tyler the surgery he needs. My friend, the jeweler, has already arranged for a buyer, a private collector who specializes in Georgian jewelry. The funds can be wired directly to the Atlanta hospital today." As the reality sank in, that they had found a solution, that Tyler would get his surgery without compromising their principles, Michael felt his knees weaken. He sat heavily on a nearby bench, the brooch clutched in his hand. "Does Sarah know?" "Not yet. I wanted to find you first." "Doctor." Collins sat beside him. "There's something else you should know. The Wildlife Center has received an anonymous donation this morning, enough to cover operating costs for the next 2 years. The timing seems significant." Michael looked up sharply. "Anonymous? How much?" $50,000, Dr. Collins said quietly. "Exactly the amount Frank Peterson offered you for Tyler's surgery." The implication was clear. Frank, knowing they had rejected his direct offer, had found another way to make amends, one that separated his assistance from any expectation of legal concessions. "He's still going to face charges," Michael said. Half statement, half question. "Yes. The prosecutor called this morning. They're proceeding with the full case against him and Evergreen. His donation doesn't change that." A complex emotion swept through Michael, not quite forgiveness, but perhaps understanding. People were seldom entirely good or entirely evil. Even Frank Peterson, for all his wrongdoing, retained some capacity for genuine remorse and restitution. When Michael reached Tyler's hospital room, he found a scene he hadn't expected. Sarah was smiling, actually smiling, while speaking with a doctor he didn't recognize. Margaret sat beside Tyler's bed, holding his hand and looking more alert than she had in months. "Michael," Sarah called when she spotted him. "This is Dr. Chen from Atlanta Children's Hospital. He's just been reviewing Tyler's case." The cardiologist extended his hand. "Mr. Whitaker, I was explaining to your wife that we've had a cancellation in our surgical schedule. We can actually perform Tyler's procedure tomorrow morning if he arrives today as planned." That's wonderful news," Michael managed, still trying to process the sudden turn of events. "There's more," Sarah continued, her eyes bright with cautious hope. "Dr. Collins called. She told me about the brooch. The money's already being transferred to the hospital." "It's my grandmother's emerald," Margaret explained, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "I always knew it would serve a greater purpose someday." Tyler, pale but alert in his hospital bed, looked between the adults with cautious hope. "So I can have the surgery? And we didn't have to take Mr. Peterson's money?" "That's right," Michael confirmed, moving to his son's bedside. "Everything's arranged." Tyler's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I told you there's always another way." As the adults discussed logistics for the transfer to Atlanta, Tyler motioned Michael closer, lowering his voice. "Dad, what about Scout and her babies? Will they be okay?" "They're doing great," Michael assured him. "Dr. Collins says Scout is recovering remarkably well and the kits are thriving. They'll be released back into the wild when they're ready." "Not in the quarry, though," Tyler said with sudden concern. "It's not safe there." "No, not in the quarry," Michael agreed. "The environmental authorities have declared it a contaminated site. It will need extensive cleanup before any wildlife can safely return." Tyler nodded, satisfied with this answer, then asked the question Michael had been dreading. "Will our house still be gone when I come back from the hospital?" The foreclosure notice hadn't disappeared amid the medical crisis. They still had less than 3 weeks before they would be forced to leave their home, hardly an ideal recovery environment for a child after major surgery. "We're working on that," Michael said, unwilling to burden Tyler with adult concerns on the eve of his surgery. "You focus on getting better. Let us handle the rest." But the truth was, Michael had no idea how they would handle it. The money from Margaret's brooch would cover Tyler's surgery but leave nothing for saving their home. Even if Michael found employment immediately, unlikely given the economic climate in Pine Creek and Frank Peterson's influence in the local business community, it wouldn't be enough to catch up on the months of missed mortgage payments. As the ambulance team arrived to prepare Tyler for transport, Dr. Collins appeared in the doorway, Scout's 4 kits nestled in a carrier she held carefully. "I thought Tyler might want to see them before he leaves," she explained. "Scout is still at the clinic, but these little ones are portable." Tyler's face lit up as Dr. Collins brought the carrier close enough for him to see the baby raccoons. They were growing rapidly, their distinctive masked faces now alert and curious as they peered at the humans surrounding them. "They're getting so big," Tyler marveled, reaching a finger toward the carrier mesh. One of the kits extended a tiny paw in response, touching the spot where Tyler's finger pressed against the barrier. "They recognize your scent," Dr. Collins explained. "Raccoons have excellent memories, especially for those who've helped them." As Tyler said goodbye to the Kits, promising to visit them when he returned from Atlanta, Michael noticed Margaret watching the scene with an expression of profound satisfaction. "You knew," he said quietly, moving to stand beside his mother-in-law. "About the brooch, about Scout. Somehow, you knew all along." Margaret's smile was enigmatic. "I've spent my life learning to listen to what the natural world tries to tell us. Most people forget how, but Tyler remembers. And so do you, when you allow yourself." Before Michael could question her further, the ambulance team announced they were ready to transport Tyler. The next few minutes were a flurry of activity, final checks, gathering Tyler's few personal items, arranging who would ride in the ambulance and who would follow by car. As they wheeled Tyler toward the elevator, a commotion at the end of the hall caught everyone's attention. Jason Peterson was running toward them, clutching what looked like a stuffed animal. "Wait!" he called, slightly out of breath as he reached them. "I wanted to give Tyler this before he left." It wasn't a stuffed animal, Michael realized, but a plush raccoon toy, complete with masked face and bushy ringed tail. "I saw it at the store and thought—" Jason trailed off, suddenly self-conscious. "For good luck, I guess." Tyler accepted the gift with a genuine smile. "Thanks, Jason. That's really cool of you." As Jason stepped back, Michael noticed Frank Peterson standing at the far end of the corridor, watching silently. Their eyes met briefly. No words exchanged, but a subtle nod of acknowledgement passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of complex humanity on both sides. The ambulance ride to Atlanta passed in tense silence. Tyler dozed fitfully, the steady beep of the portable monitor tracking his fragile heart. Sarah sat beside him, one hand always in contact with her son, while Michael watched the Georgia landscape roll by through the small rear window. At Atlanta Children's Hospital, they were greeted by an efficient team who whisked Tyler away for immediate pre-surgical testing. The financial office confirmed receipt of the funds from the brooch sale, and just like that, the insurmountable obstacle that had loomed over them for days was resolved. While Tyler underwent his final evaluations, Michael and Sarah found themselves momentarily alone in a quiet waiting area. The reality of their situation, both the immediate crisis and the uncertain future beyond it, settled over them like a heavy blanket. "What happens after?" Sarah asked softly, giving voice to the question they'd both been avoiding. "When Tyler's recovered but we have no home to take him to?" Michael had no answer that wouldn't sound like empty reassurance. The truth was, he didn't know. The brooch had solved their most pressing problem, but their broader financial situation remained dire. "One crisis at a time," he said finally, taking her hand. "Right now, let's focus on Tyler getting through surgery." Sarah nodded, leaning against his shoulder in a gesture of unity they hadn't shared in months. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. A family reconnected through crisis. Dr. Chen found them there an hour later, his expression cautiously optimistic as he reviewed the final test results. "Tyler's condition is serious but stable," he confirmed. "We'll proceed with surgery first thing tomorrow morning." The procedure should take approximately 6 hours, followed by at least 3 days in intensive care. "And his prognosis?" Sarah asked, the doctor in her seeking specific medical details while the mother in her held her breath. "With successful surgery and proper recovery, Tyler can expect to lead a relatively normal life. There will be limitations on strenuous activities, ongoing medication, and regular monitoring, but children his age typically show remarkable resilience and adaptation. It was the best they could hope for under the circumstances." As they signed the final consent forms, Michael felt a strange sense of calm descend. The path forward was clear, at least for the immediate future. Tyler would have his surgery, they would support his recovery, and somehow they would figure out the rest. That evening, they were allowed to stay with Tyler until he was taken to pre-op. He was surprisingly composed for a 10-year-old facing open-heart surgery, his main concern seemingly for others rather than himself. "When I get better, can we help Dr. Collins release Scout and her babies back into the wild?" he asked, as the nurses prepared his final medications. "Of course," Michael promised, "though we'll need to find a safe place for them now that the quarry's been contaminated." Tyler's expression turned thoughtful. "What about our woods, the part behind our house?" The question carried a poignant assumption that they would still have their woods to return to. Michael exchanged a quick glance with Sarah, both silently agreeing not to burden Tyler with the reality of their impending eviction. "That's a wonderful idea," Sarah said, smoothing Tyler's hair back from his forehead. The perfect place for Scout to raise her family. As the night deepened and Tyler finally drifted to sleep, Michael stood at the window of the hospital room, looking out at the Atlanta skyline glittering against the dark sky. So different from the star-filled darkness above their country home, yet beautiful in its own way. A reminder that beauty could be found in unexpected places, even in the midst of upheaval and uncertainty. His phone vibrated with an incoming text. It was from Dr. Collins. "Something remarkable has happened. Call when you can." Stepping into the hallway to avoid disturbing Tyler, Michael dialed her number, a knot of apprehension forming in his stomach. Had something happened to Scout or her kits? "Michael," Dr. Collins answered immediately. "How's Tyler?" "Surgery tomorrow morning. The doctors are cautiously optimistic." He kept his voice low, aware of other families trying to rest in nearby rooms. "What's happening there?" "Is it Scout?" "In a manner of speaking," Dr. Collins replied, her voice containing an odd note of wonder. "Scout escaped again this morning, and this time she took her kits with her." "Escaped?" Michael repeated, alarm rising. "But she's still recovering, and the kits are too young to—" "That's what I thought," Dr. Collins interrupted. "Until I got a call from Margaret an hour ago. Scout and all 4 kits are at your house, in your backyard to be precise." Michael struggled to process this information. "That's impossible. The clinic is 5 miles from our house, and Scout's missing a paw. She couldn't possibly transport 4 kits that distance." "I know how it sounds," Dr. Collins acknowledged. "But I'm standing in your backyard right now watching Scout teach her kits how to wash food in your bird bath. She's thinner and her surgical site shows signs of stress, but otherwise she seems remarkably fine. The kits are exhausted but unharmed." The image was so vivid, so bizarrely specific that Michael couldn't dismiss it as confusion or exaggeration. "Why would she go to our house?" "That's not even the strangest part," Dr. Collins continued. "When I arrived, Margaret was sitting on your back porch, watching them. She said she'd been expecting them. That Scout was returning the favor." A chill ran down Michael's spine that had nothing to do with the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. "What favor?" "That's what I asked. Margaret just smiled and said, 'You'll see. Tell Michael to check his email.'" Frowning, Michael pulled the phone from his ear long enough to open his email app. Among the usual bills and spam was a message from an unfamiliar address, ceo@willowtrust.org. "Hold on," he told Dr. Collins, opening the email with growing curiosity. The message was brief and formal. "Mr. Whitaker, following our conversation with Mrs. Margaret Wheeler, regarding the historic significance of your property as a wildlife corridor, Willow Trust is prepared to offer purchase of a conservation easement on the wooded portion of your land. Our preliminary offer of $120,000 reflects both market value and ecological importance. This arrangement would allow you to retain ownership and residential use while preserving the land's natural state in perpetuity. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss this opportunity. Sincerely, Eleanor Blackwood, Chief Executive Officer, Willow Trust Conservation Foundation." Michael read the email twice, struggling to comprehend its implications. What conversation with Margaret? What's Willow Trust? It's a legitimate conservation organization, Dr. Collins confirmed, apparently having received the same information from Margaret. They specialize in preserving wildlife corridors in developing areas. And the amount they're offering would more than cover your mortgage arrears. The pieces began falling into place with dizzying speed. Margaret, despite her Alzheimer's, had somehow contacted this organization. The conservation easement would provide the funds they needed to save their home while simultaneously protecting the forest from development. It was an elegant solution to multiple problems. If it was real, this seems too convenient to be true, Michael said cautiously. How would Margaret even know about this organization, much less arrange a conversation with their CEO? According to Margaret, she helped found Willow Trust 30 years ago, Dr. Collins explained. Eleanor Blackwood was one of her first wildlife rehabilitation interns. They've apparently stayed in touch all these years, though Margaret's condition has limited their recent communication. It was plausible, Michael realized. Despite her current fragility, Margaret had once been a formidable conservationist with connections throughout the Southeast. That part of her life had simply faded from family conversation as her condition worsened. And Scout, how does she fit into all this? Dr. Collins' voice held a mixture of scientific caution and undisguised wonder. I can't explain it rationally. But Margaret seems to believe that Scout deliberately led us to the quarry to expose the environmental violations, then to the hidden brooch to fund Tyler's surgery, and now back to your property to draw attention to its conservation value. That's, Michael began. Impossible? Dr. Collins finished for him. Probably. But I've worked with wildlife long enough to know there are connections and intelligences in the natural world that we barely understand. Whatever the explanation, the result is the same. A solution has appeared precisely when you needed it most. As Michael ended the call and returned to Tyler's room, his mind struggled to reconcile rational explanation with the extraordinary sequence of events. Could it all be coincidence? A series of fortunate accidents? Or was there something more at work? Some deeper intelligence and purpose behind Scout's seemingly deliberate actions? Sarah looked up as he entered, immediately sensing something had changed. What is it? I'm not entirely sure, Michael admitted, sitting beside her. But I think we might have just found a way to keep our home. As he shared Dr. Collins' call and the email from Willow Trust, Sarah's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious hope to something approaching wonder. Do you think it's real? She asked when he'd finished. This offer? Dr. Collins seems to think so. And it would explain why Scout took her kits to our property specifically. Sarah's gaze drifted to Tyler, sleeping peacefully ahead of tomorrow's surgery. It's almost like... Like what? Like something or someone is watching out for us, she finished softly, making sure we have what we need when we need it most. Michael had never been prone to mystical thinking. He preferred concrete explanations, cause and effect, the reliable mechanics of the physical world. But the events of the past weeks had pushed the boundaries of what he could explain through rational means alone. Whatever or whoever it is, he said finally, I'm grateful. As the night deepened toward morning and Tyler's surgery drew near, Michael found himself standing again at the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere far north, in the woods behind their home, the home they might now be able to keep, a mother raccoon was teaching her kits how to survive in a world that wasn't always kind to wild things, and somehow, against all odds, both families had found a way to save each other. 3 months had passed since Tyler's surgery, and spring was beginning to touch the woods behind the Whitaker home. Tender green buds appeared on branches that had stood bare through winter, and bird song filled the morning air with promise and renewal. Sitting on the back porch, wrapped in a quilt against the lingering chill, Tyler watched the tree line with patient anticipation. "They'll come when they're ready," Margaret said from her rocking chair beside him. Her good days had become more frequent in recent months, as if Tyler's recovery had somehow anchored her own fragile mind. Raccoons are crepuscular, most active at dawn and dusk. Tyler nodded, familiar with the term from the wildlife books he'd devoured during his recovery. "Do you think Scout will recognize me? It's been so long." "Some connections transcend time," Margaret replied with the quiet certainty that characterized her lucid moments. She'll remember. The past months had transformed the Whitakers in ways both visible and invisible. Tyler's chest bore a neat surgical scar that would fade with time but never disappear completely, a permanent reminder of how close they had come to losing him. His recovery had progressed remarkably well, exceeding even Dr. Chen's optimistic predictions, though he still tired easily and would need medication for years to come. Michael stood at the kitchen window, watching his son and mother-in-law while preparing breakfast. The conservation easement from Willow Trust had indeed been legitimate, providing enough funds to save their home and create a modest financial cushion. Eleanor Blackwood, the Trust's CEO and Margaret's former protege, had personally overseen the arrangement, ensuring that the wooded portion of their property would remain untouched habitat in perpetuity while leaving the house an immediate yard for their continued use. "Is he still out there waiting?" Sarah asked, entering the kitchen in her bathrobe, hair still damp from the shower. "Going on 2 hours now," Michael confirmed with a fond smile. "Margaret says Scout and her family should be active around dawn and dusk, but so far no sign of them." Sarah moved beside him at the window, leaning against his shoulder in a gesture that had become comfortable again after years of distance. The wildlife cameras Dr. Collins installed caught them 3 times last week. They're definitely still in the area. The cameras had been Dr. Collins' idea, a way for Tyler to monitor local wildlife without overtaxing himself during recovery. They had captured not just Scout and her growing kits, but an impressive diversity of forest creatures, deer with spring fawns, a red fox family, owls, and even a black bear passing through. The Whitaker property, it turned out, was a crucial corridor connecting larger wilderness areas, exactly the kind of habitat Willow Trust was dedicated to preserving. "Any word on the quarry cleanup?" Sarah asked, changing the subject. Michael nodded. "EPA finished their assessment yesterday. The contamination was significant, but contained. They'll start remediation next month." The investigation into evergreen development had expanded far beyond Pine Creek, uncovering a pattern of environmental violations across 3 states. The company's stock had plummeted, and several executives now faced federal charges. Frank Peterson had pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony against his corporate employers, receiving probation and community service rather than jail time. "And Jason?" Sarah's tone softened, knowing the complicated feelings Michael had about Frank's son. "Starting at the Wildlife Center this weekend, Dr. Collins says he's surprisingly good with the rehabilitation cases." Michael smiled slightly. "Apparently, he specifically asked to work with the Raccoon program." The doorbell interrupted their conversation. Michael glanced at the clock, frowning slightly. "It's barely 7. Who would—" "I'll get it," Sarah offered, tightening her robe. "You finish breakfast before Tyler comes in starving from his wildlife watch." She returned moments later, expression puzzled as she held up a thick manila envelope. "Special delivery." The courier wouldn't say who sent it, just that it was urgent. Michael opened the envelope, extracting several official-looking documents and a brief handwritten note. As he scanned the contents, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "What is it?" Sarah asked, concerned by his reaction. "It's a job offer," he said slowly, as if the words might change if spoken too quickly. "From Willow Trust." They're establishing a new position, Regional Habitat Coordinator, and they want me to fill it. Sarah took the papers, examining them with growing amazement. Full benefits, flexible schedule to accommodate Tyler's ongoing medical needs, and, her voice caught, "Michael, this salary is nearly twice what you made at the lumber mill." Michael nodded, still processing the unexpected development. "The note is from Eleanor Blackwood. She says Margaret mentioned my unique qualifications and deep connection to the local ecosystem." "But you're not a trained conservationist," Sarah pointed out gently. "No," Michael agreed. "But I know these woods better than most. I grew up hunting and tracking here. I know the wildlife patterns, the water sources, the seasonal changes." He paused, recognition dawning. "This is what I wanted to do, before life took me in another direction. Before I convinced myself that practical concerns outweighed passion." Sarah's smile was tinged with wonder. "Margaret remembers. Even through the Alzheimer's, she remembers who you really are." A sudden excited shout from the back porch interrupted them. "Dad! Mom! They're here!" Abandoning the documents on the counter, Michael and Sarah hurried to the porch. Tyler was standing now, pointing toward the edge of the woods where 5 distinct shapes had emerged into the early morning light. Scout led the procession, her missing front paw evident in her distinctive 3-legged gait, yet she moved with remarkable agility. Behind her, 4 nearly grown kits followed in loose formation, their masks and ringed tails unmistakable even at a distance. They approached the bird bath Tyler had filled fresh that morning, Scout chittering instructions that seemed almost like language. "They're so big now," Tyler whispered, his face alight with joy. "And Scout looks completely healed." "Raccoons are remarkably adaptable," Margaret observed. "Once they learn to compensate for an injury, they rarely let it limit them." The family watched in reverent silence as Scout supervised her kit's morning ablutions, each young raccoon taking turns washing their food in the bird bath with the meticulous hand motions characteristic of their species. There was something profoundly ordinary yet miraculous about the scene. Wild creatures going about their lives, unconcerned with human observation, yet somehow connected to the humans watching. "Should we try to get closer?" Tyler asked, his voice hushed with excitement. "No need," Margaret replied with quiet certainty. "They'll come to us when they're ready." As if hearing her words, Scout suddenly looked up, her intelligent eyes fixing directly on the porch. For a long moment, Raccoon and humans regarded each other across the yard, a tableau frozen in perfect stillness. Then, with deliberate purpose, Scout approached, her gait cautious but not fearful. "She remembers us," Tyler breathed, hardly daring to move. Scout stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at Tyler with what seemed impossible to interpret as anything other than recognition. Behind her, the kits watched curiously, chittering among themselves as if debating this unusual behavior from their mother. Moving with careful slowness, Tyler extended his hand toward the step, palm up in a gesture of peaceful greeting. No one breathed as Scout considered the offered hand, her whiskers twitching as she scented the air. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Scout placed her front paw, her remaining front paw, on Tyler's outstretched fingers. The touch was feather-light, barely perceptible, yet it carried the weight of something profound and mysterious, a connection that transcended the usual boundaries between wild and tame, human and animal. "Thank you," Tyler whispered, tears shining in his eyes, "for everything." Scout held the connection for a heartbeat longer, then withdrew, turning back to her waiting kits. With efficient maternal authority, she herded her family back toward the woods, pausing once at the tree line to look back at the humans on the porch. "She's saying goodbye," Margaret said softly. "Not forever, but for now." She's shown her kits that you're safe, that this place is protected. That's a gift among raccoons. Knowledge of safe territory is passed from mother to offspring. As Scout and her family disappeared into the understory, Tyler remained transfixed, his expression one of pure wonder. Will they come back? I expect they'll be regular visitors, Margaret replied. Raccoons establish territories of 1 to 3 miles depending on food sources. With the easement protecting these woods, they have ideal habitat right here. The morning sun had fully risen now, bathing the yard in golden light that seemed to transform the ordinary into something magical. Michael found himself thinking of the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this moment. A trapped raccoon, a boy's compassion, a family's crisis, and the remarkable series of coincidences that had saved them all. "Come on inside for breakfast," Sarah urged gently. "You need to take your medication, Tyler." As they turned to go in, Michael noticed a small object on the step where Scout had stood. Bending down, he discovered a smooth, polished river stone, unusual among the gravel and dirt of their yard. "What's that?" Sarah asked, noticing his interest. Michael picked up the stone, turning it over in his hand. "Just a rock, but it's not from around here. Must have been carried in somehow." Margaret leaned forward in her chair, eyes suddenly sharp with interest. "May I see that?" Michael placed the stone in her outstretched hand. Margaret examined it carefully, a smile spreading across her weathered face. "Remarkable," she murmured. "This is a stone from Copper Creek, nearly 10 miles from here. It's the exact spot where I released that mother raccoon and her kits 20 years ago." She looked up at their startled expressions. Raccoons collect objects that interest them. They're one of the few non-primate species known to keep treasures, items with no obvious survival value that they simply find appealing or significant. Tyler's eyes widened. "You think Scout brought it here on purpose? As a gift? Or as proof?" Margaret suggested. "Evidence of where she came from, who she is." She handed the stone to Tyler. "Whatever the reason, it's yours now." A reminder that sometimes the most important connections in life are the ones we least expect. That evening, as twilight settled over the woods, the Whitakers gathered on the porch again. The day had been filled with quiet celebration, of Tyler's continuing recovery, of Michael's unexpected job offer, of the security and purpose that had returned to their lives when it seemed all might be lost. "I've been thinking," Michael said as they watched fireflies begin to rise from the darkening grass, "about what we should call our place now that it's officially a wildlife sanctuary." "Does it need a name?" Sarah asked, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder. Willow Trust suggested it, for their promotional materials and conservation maps, something more distinctive than the Whitaker property. Tyler, who had been quietly contemplating the woods, suddenly straightened. "I know what we should call it," he said with conviction. "Scout's Haven." The name settled over them with perfect rightness, a verbal recognition of the truth they'd all come to understand, that this land and their place on it had been saved through an unlikely alliance with a 3-legged raccoon who had somehow recognized their family as worth saving. "Scout's Haven it is," Michael agreed, his voice thick with emotion. As darkness fell completely, they heard the distinctive chittering of raccoons from the forest edge. Though too dark to see clearly, they could sense movement among the trees. Scout and her family, beginning their nightly rounds in a world that had become just a little safer for them, just as they had made the world safer for the humans who shared their territory. Tyler fingered the smooth river stone in his pocket, his talisman and reminder of the extraordinary events that had changed their lives. The stone was cool and solid, a tangible connection to places he'd never seen and a past he hadn't witnessed, yet somehow felt part of. "You know," Margaret said softly, her voice clear and present in a way that had once been rare but was becoming more common. "There's an old Cherokee belief that animals are messengers between worlds, that they carry wisdom we've forgotten how to hear." "Do you believe that, Grandma?" Tyler asked. Margaret smiled, her eyes reflecting the first emerging stars. "I believe there are more connections in this world than we can see. More intelligence, more purpose, more pattern than we give credit for. I believe Scout found you because you needed each other, because sometimes saving another life is how we save our own." The night deepened around them. The sounds of the forest, owl calls, rustling leaves, distant fox barks, creating a living symphony. The Whitaker home stood as it had for generations, but now with new purpose as both sanctuary and symbol of unexpected redemption. Inside Tyler's chest, his mended heart beat steady and strong. On the forest floor, Scout's three-legged tracks marked paths invisible to human eyes. Between them stretched understanding that required no words, a covenant of mutual protection and recognition that transcended species. As they finally rose to go inside, Tyler paused at the door, looking back at the darkened woods one last time. "Good night, Scout," he whispered. "Thank you for finding me." And though no human ear could detect it, somewhere in the nighttime forest, a chittered response seemed to answer, "Thank you for saving me." In that exchange, real or imagined, literal or symbolic, lay the simple truth at the heart of their extraordinary journey, that compassion creates connections that transform both the giver and receiver, that mercy shown to the vulnerable returns in unexpected ways, and that in the act of protecting those weaker than ourselves, we often discover our own greatest strength. Scout's Haven would stand as testament to that truth for generations to come, a place where a boy freed a trapped raccoon and in return found himself freed from limitations he never knew could be overcome. Remember when kindness wasn't seen as weakness, but as our greatest strength. Boy frees trapped raccoon reminds us that compassion creates connections that transform both giver and receiver. Like Tyler and Scout, many of us have experienced moments where helping another, even when it seemed foolish or impractical, ultimately saved us in unexpected ways. As we navigate our golden years, it's easy to feel the world has forgotten the values we were raised with. Yet this story echoes the wisdom many of us learned at our grandparents' knees, that we're all connected in ways modern life tries to deny. Margaret's journey with Alzheimer's, yet retaining her essential wisdom, mirrors what many of us face with aging loved ones, recognizing that even as memory fades, the soul's deepest knowledge remains. When Scout placed her paw on Tyler's hand, wasn't that the recognition we all seek? That our lives matter, that our kindnesses are remembered, that we leave imprints deeper than we know. What unexpected connection has transformed your life when you needed it most? Has an act of compassion ever returned to you in ways you never anticipated? Share your stories below. They may be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.